co-founder of and CEO of Vodeclic. Vodeclic is a cloud-based training company for desktop software, web apps, and cloud services. It's an all-in-one solution designed to help users enhance their digital, internet, and collaborative skills. Our solution features 20,000 plus exclusive how-to videos in 6 languages, plus learning tools for all users, as well as business analytics and APIs for enterprise customers. Our customers are from SMB to Fortune 500, such as L'Oreal, Siemens, Bayer, Chubb & Son, BNP, Total, etc., etc. I'm excited to sponsor this webinar about digital transformation with Bersin by Deloitte. Today's webinar will be handled by Wendy Wang Odia, research analyst. Hi, Wendy.
Hello, everybody. This is Wendy Wang here.
And Todd Tauber, VP Enterprise Learning Research. Hi, Todd.
Hi, Xavier. Thanks, everybody, for making time for us today.
So this here webinar will be handled by Wendy and Todd. You can use the control panel on the right side of your screen to ask questions. We will share some responses at the end of the webinar. During this webinar also, we will generate 2 polls during this session, and we will appreciate your participation to collect and share data and some insights together with Todd and Wendy about the results. So thanks in advance for your participation. Wendy, Todd, you're on board.
Great. Thanks again, Xavier, and thanks for your support. We wanted to cover, so first of all, just for anybody who's not familiar, I don't want to go into too much detail here, but essentially what Bersin by Deloitte is we're a unit of Deloitte Consulting in the US, and we do research to help people who work in various areas of HR, which you can see on the right side of the page, do their jobs better. So here's a little bit about what we do and how. And the webinar will feature some of our research as well as some other trends and data points that we've been following. The agenda for today is we wanted to cover 4 main things. Number 1, where the digital skills gap is coming from and what it actually looks like for many organizations. The second thing is how the requirements are shifting for people who are responsible for delivering organizational learning. The third thing is some new approaches that we're seeing in the marketplace, and specifically around delivering some of these digital capabilities that organizations are so hungry for. And then the last thing is some recommendations and smart practices that we've observed in terms of how organizations are driving those digital capabilities themselves. And then at the end, we'll have a little bit of time for some Q&A as well. So we'll start with the digital skills gap itself and sort of where it comes from. And from our perspective, a lot of this is driven by technology for obvious reasons. Organizations are coming to us frequently now with questions about how to address the digital skills gap, and it seems to be growing. And there's a number of reasons for this, but technology is obviously the big one, and it's because technology is transforming business and markets faster than most organizations can adapt to it. Technology is changing all the time. It's infusing itself into everything that we do. It's also driving a lot of innovation and disruption in markets, as well as helping some organizations who know and have figured out how to deal with it to drive better business performance. So what the data here shows, and this is some data from McKinsey, in the last 20 years or so, US businesses have become more digital. Specifically, the percentage of capital investments that they make that go towards technology has increased dramatically, which means that there's more and more technology at the heart of everything that organizations do. It's not just about driving back office operations. It's firmly rooted in the front office now as well, and it's infused itself into the way that everybody does their jobs. It used to be that software wasn't released until it had gone through years of testing and perfection. But that's not the case anymore. It's changed. Digital distribution, instant feedback from users has enabled developers to update and tweak products much more quickly than they used to. Every technology company, every software company is moving in this direction. Microsoft last year, which is probably one of the biggest purveyors of enterprise technology, switched from 3-year release cycles for many of their products to more continuous release cycles. And that's putting them more in line with the way that some of the newer generation of companies like Amazon, like Google, and Facebook are releasing software to the general public. And what that means is that every time a new product or feature rolls out, things change. And that's becoming an issue for some companies, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But the other thing that comes out of all of this is that all of this technology is influencing the ways that people's jobs are done and work gets done. And so digital skills are increasingly necessary to get jobs done. So what this chart here shows is that demand for a range of digital skills are in high demand over the next decade or so. And it's not just about how to use Facebook or harness LinkedIn to do your job. It's everything. One obvious example, because we're all sitting on this webinar here, is the ability to work virtually. More and more people are doing work remotely. And that's very different from sitting in an office with all of your colleagues. As I mentioned, Microsoft is changing the way it's operating and releasing software. That has a big impact on understanding how to use corporate IT systems. A lot of companies are moving to more cloud-based software. That's the same issue there. Release cycles that used to happen on an annual or every other year basis happen much more frequently now. And every time those changes happen, people's jobs are impacted. The way that they get their jobs done is impacted. And so it's a big challenge, and a lot of organizations aren't up to speed. Every organization, or almost every organization, almost 80% of them, in a survey that MIT Sloan Management Review and Capgemini did last year, understand the imperative of transforming their businesses digitally, and it's up and down the value chain. But almost 2/3 of them admit that technology in their organization changes too slowly. They're just not prepared for this. And what we see is that there are a number of reasons they're having a hard time keeping up. There is poor integration between systems. There's not very good infrastructure for communicating. There's a resistance in many organizations to consumer technologies, which more and more people are bringing into the workplace. There's security issues that put some legitimate constraints around the way that people do their jobs. Workplaces in some cases aren't adapted for it. But the biggest issue that we see is that most organizations have employees that aren't quite ready for this. And this isn't just about older workers, millennials too. Knowing how to use Facebook or YouTube or Twitter doesn't necessarily translate directly into knowing how to use things like Salesforce or Marketo or SAP. But that's what people need to be able to do. And it's a problem for organizations because people that don't know how to use their systems are a drag on productivity. And whether you're a big company or a small company, you can't afford that anymore. So there was a study done in the Netherlands last year of large companies in Europe. And what they found was that there was almost an 8% productivity drop because of a lack of the right skills to use the tools that people have at their disposal. And so what we're seeing at Bersin in learning specifically is that new solutions are needed. So here's a quote that we came across recently, and this is something that one of our members told us about. It was a quote from an RFP from a multinational retailer that does over $10 billion of revenue with 60,000 employees. And what they said is that as SaaS platforms that they use are constantly evolving, the training materials are hard to keep up to date for them. So what they're looking for is somebody that can provide video training materials on the tools that the company uses every day. So they're looking specifically at video, and we'll get into this a little bit later, because it can be, number one, it's compatible with the way that people want to learn some of these things these days. And more importantly, it's easy and quick for them to keep up to date. So Wendy's got a specific example that she's going to talk us through here.
Okay. So what we have here is an example from a large insurance company based here in the U.S. And they are a company with over 10,000 employees and also have global locations. So what they needed a solution for was, as an insurance company, they really wanted to be able to find areas where they could be more efficient and to maintain and increase that efficiency over time as well. And like many other companies where they're seeing a lot of changes, they also need their employees to keep up to date with any technological changes, such as, even just with computer software that's used inside the company. And the last few years, what this company has tried to do was provide more self-service-based soft skills training for their employees, and they really wanted to build a library of courses that employees can access as they needed, whenever they needed. And like many other companies, and this is something we will talk about later, having IT resources available was not necessarily part of their L&D organization, but at the same time, they still wanted to make that available for the employees in case they needed it. And because they also had a global audience of employees, they wanted to be able to find a solution that was able to deliver content in multiple languages. So what this organization was able to do was they partnered with a learning content provider, and they were able to leverage a robust library of different types of desktop functionality training for employees, and they could access this whenever they need to get up to speed with desktop software, like some of the most common would be the Microsoft Office suite. And we have some quotes here from one of the leaders, and they're seeing a lot of benefits from leveraging this learning content provider. For them, having language capabilities was a big one, as many companies are becoming more global. And it was really important for them to have content available that would not take hours and hours for the employees to catch up to date, but something that was bite-sized and they could access right away.
Great, thanks, Wendy.
And
sorry, go ahead.
I believe we have a poll coming up, correct?
Yep. So Xavier, if you could queue up the poll, the question here for you all is, what are the biggest digital capability gaps in your organizations?
There we go. You should all see the poll.
So we'll give that a minute or so to collect the data.
Yep. So I can monitor who has answered. So could you please all answer? Yeah, it starts. 6, 10, 13, 20, 25, 35, 65. Yep. 30 seconds.
For some reason, as the presenter, sorry, Xavier, for some reason, as the presenter, I can't see the results, but could you maybe call out
okay.
what it says?
Yes, I'm going to show you the response. Okay, so
okay.
I close the poll, and now you should all see the results. Todd, do you see them?
I don't.
You don't. Okay, Wendy, do you see them?
I do.
Okay, so can you comment those results with and maybe tell some give some insight to Todd?
Sure. So so what we're seeing here, that almost half of our audience here say that using social media to improve collaboration, innovation is probably the biggest gap, and followed by that, understanding business, IT systems, and software. Almost a third of you, so that was also one of the biggest gaps. And then the other two about that are tied up are ability to work virtually, remotely, and also having digital design and communication skills.
I would like to add something about those results, which is surprising. We get 61 votes, and there is zero vote for leverage social media to drive sales. This is to me surprising, because I believe that social tools to go through social sales process are key. If we take a look at our business, I mean, uh, working on social media such as corporate social networks such as LinkedIn, etc., is key for sales. So it's quite surprising, but to me, it just means that probably voters and their organization are not ready yet to go and use those process in sales, and it's probably key to have an idea that skills, digital skills of those people are not ready to go through social sales.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yep.
It could also be a function of the audience that we attract.
Yeah, probably also. Yep.
Yeah. So is my screen back on now, Xavier?
Yep.
Okay. So the problem here, I think, is clear. A lot of organizations are struggling with similar gaps in terms of the capabilities that they've got in the organizations. At the same time, the requirements for how people learn and how organizations deliver learning are evolving. And this is something that we talk about quite a lot in our research. What's really interesting is in the context of such widespread recognition that this is a big challenge, is that a lot of organizations aren't keeping up in terms of how they address that. We survey every year organizations on how they allocate their budgets and how they allocate their time on training. And the portion of budgets that are devoted to IT and desktop skills training have dropped from almost a quarter about 8 or 9 years ago to less than 10% last year. And that's pretty remarkable. Now, at the same time, a lot more organizations are pushing people to be more self-directed in their learning. And a lot of individuals are going out and looking for options on their own. I read the other day that something like 60% of IT professionals have paid for training out of their own pocket in order to keep their skills up to date. So everybody's got a responsibility here. But for the average employee who's not going to spend a whole lot of money out of their pocket on things like this, they're left with some less than optimal options. They can do searches online, they can go watch videos, they can go into message boards, but the quality of that stuff is uneven. It's difficult to use, it's difficult to find the answers they need. The other thing that we've started to pay attention to a lot recently is that it's not just the investment priorities that have changed, but it's the learners themselves. And what we find is that a lot of organizations aren't keeping up with their audience. And in fact, a lot of learning organizations tell us that they don't have very good intelligence or insight about their audience beyond sort of basic demographics. And so we've started to build up some research about what that new learning profile looks like, what the employees are looking for, how employees themselves are behaving. We've talked in some of our other research about how employees are overwhelmed. People have a difficult time, for example, paying attention to long blocks of lectures, and not just because they have short attention spans, but also because there's the constant distractions from emails, from conference calls, from meetings. People have constant demands to prepare for meetings, and they've got to search for information and multitask. There's less and less, and there's lots of documentation about this, less and less time for actual work these days. More and more time is spent managing information, managing relationships. And so a lot of people complain that they just don't even have time to do their jobs. And in fact, the average employee, according to some data that we've seen, spends less than 1 or 2% of their typical week on training and development per se. So even if you can get their attention, it's hard to keep it. They're distracted, they're impatient. In a lot of cases, they're not tied the way that they used to be to a desk where you can reach them easily. People aren't working in company-owned locations only anymore. They're working in multiple locations, increasingly at home, and increasingly a significant portion of many companies' workforce doesn't actually work for those organizations. They're freelancers, they're temps. And so it's hard to reach people consistently when they don't stay put, and it's even harder when they don't stick around. The other thing is that the access to things like Google and access to apps and smartphones that are always with people has changed the way people approach learning in many situations. People don't have the time, the patience, the inclination to learn as many things just in case anymore, because people are so overwhelmed and because they can get answers so easily. They're looking for more on-demand opportunities to learn just what they need to know exactly when they need it. And so performance support is becoming a more important focus of the way that people actually learn to do their jobs than classroom training or even e-learning courses used to be. People are also very much self-directed in their learning, as I mentioned before. They're not finding what they need from their companies. And they're also looking increasingly to learn from each other as much as they are from their managers, from experts that their company has appointed. So along with that is a set of new requirements. People are getting used to high quality user experiences on their smartphones, on the websites and the apps that they use all day, every day. And when they come to work and find software and learning tools that are years behind, it's a big problem for them, both in terms of engagement and in terms of satisfaction and in terms of their attention. Online people don't have to stick around. They can click away easily. On conference calls, people can very simply tune out. So again, this isn't just about millennials, and we put up some data here specifically to make the point that Gen Xers and baby boomers are engaging with social networking sites and video games and online videos almost as much as millennials are. So it isn't just a generational issue. People's behavior has changed dramatically, and learning organizations need to catch up to that. Another issue here is that people want to learn differently. As I mentioned before, more and more people are learning at their own pace. They want to learn with other people. More people actually will turn to Google search and the web before they look for online courses. They're getting more and more used to learning in informal settings than they are from formal training programs. And they're accessing support resources from their mobile devices when they need them. And what's really interesting is that people are 4 times more likely to go to YouTube for learning than they are to turn first to their in-house social network. And what all this says is that there's been a big shift in the way that people learn, and organizations need to be very conscious of this in terms of laying out and designing and organizing learning opportunities and learning experiences for their employees, because otherwise people will go and find their own solutions. So Wendy's got another example of what this looks like in real life.
Okay, thank you, Todd. So what we have here is an example of a company that's trying to deliver valuable learning content to employees who are like the new learner like that we just talked about. They're too busy, they're overwhelmed, and they have no time for learning. And this is a large advertising agency here in the U.S., and they are in a business where they need to be up to date with the latest trends in order to deliver the best for their clients. So they need to be keeping up to date with their skills. They need to know what's going on around them in the business and in the industry, but they don't have the time to learn. Like one of their leaders says, sometimes when their employees need to go for lunch, even setting aside 15 minutes is a big deal. It's a big request. So then how could they solve their issue here? They need to have some form of learning that will be valuable and could give some really good insights, but in a very short amount of time. And they have requirement of trying to get content within 15 minutes, and that could be fun and easy so that people in the organization will be willing to set aside time in the day to consume it. So again, like the previous company we just talked about, they also partnered with an external learning content provider, and with that partnership, their employees were able to access video learning on any device, and that it was so that it was mobile and they could be anywhere and they could be on the go and be learning, and that they were. And one of the biggest draw for them was that the learning pieces were very short. Like I said, a lot of the learning content was within 60 seconds, and within 60 seconds they could learn a snippet of some knowledge nugget that they could find useful or valuable when they're meeting with their clients or just in their daily businesses. And most of all, they said the employees enjoyed it. And in a business where they don't have the time to be learning or to look for information, it's something that they want to do and that they look forward to doing. And with that, actually, we will be talking more about how L&D could be using some of the new approaches to deliver learning, and Todd will walk you through some of that.
Thanks, Wendy. So one obvious thing is learning itself has become a lot more digital, and as it has, it's become a lot more continuous because it's easier to fit in and around people's work and lives. And increasingly, it's getting more personalized. I think what's most fascinating about this data, and this comes from our corporate learning fact books, is that a decade ago, more than 70% of instruction was delivered through classrooms, live classrooms. And virtual has taken some of that slack, but less than half of training is now delivered in classrooms. If you add the live virtual stuff, which is sort of plateaued at around 12%, 10 or 15%, it's still just barely over half. More and more is happening in self-directed formats. And online self-study, e-learning, has grown dramatically. But what's really fascinating is this other category, which is up to about 24%. Almost a quarter of learning is happening in other methods, and specifically around two things. Number one, it's more collaborative methods and feedback-based methods, things like coaching and mentoring, some of which is organized, some of which is not, but also peer-to-peer networking, communities of practice, sharing in professional networks. The other big category that's included in this other is informal activities. It's watching short video clips, it's reading books or book summaries, articles, and using job aids. All of those other things are growing most quickly while a lot of these other methods are declining or shrinking. And that's a reflection of a lot of the trends that we were talking about earlier. And investments that companies make are shifting in response. They're spending less and less on custom developed instructor-led content, not a big surprise. And the big beneficiary has been off-the-shelf content. And this trend is especially pronounced among smaller and mid-sized companies. For mid-sized companies, for example, that 19% in the off-the-shelf category is actually more like 27% now. Bigger companies have not shifted as quickly, partly because they have the resources to devote to classroom instruction, and partly because they have larger teams in-house to do some of this stuff themselves. The other really interesting thing here is that external classes and seminars have maintained their share of spending. There's still a lot of value in face-to-face contact, in direct feedback, and learning in a classroom setting. It's just that organizations have fewer and fewer resources to do that on their own. Another big trend that we're seeing, and I think this one is probably the most interesting one, is around that issue of self-direction. And so when you take away all of the friction, all of the restrictions, and you let people choose free content, and we asked this question last year to our audience, who's actually selecting and curating those resources? Employees themselves are a significantly more important factor than the L&D department in choosing what they want. And managers are actually a significant influencer as well. And this has a lot of impact on the kinds of things that people will spend their time and devote their attention to. And I think L&D departments need to pay much closer attention to what people are doing, because learning just doesn't only happen inside of LMSs and in classrooms anymore. And what that looks like when people make their own choices is much more fragmented than what it used to be. People are still using self-paced e-learning for the bulk of their learning, but they're using things like job aids and instructional videos and virtual classrooms and knowledge bases almost as much. And this is something that we think companies need to pay much closer attention to. It's when you look at the vendors of some of these things, a lot of those categories are growing very, very quickly, whereas investment in traditional looking asynchronous isolated self-paced modules aren't growing quite as quickly. So Wendy's got another example of how this looks inside a real company. Viacom?
So Viacom, as many of you know, is a global entertainment company here in the U.S., and they are very large. They own channels like MTV, BET, Comedy Central, Nickelodeon. Many of those are global, and I'm sure many of you have heard. And they're an example of a company who's been very successful at delivering video learning for its employees. And like the other examples, they also partnered with a video learning provider. And one of the things that they did for them was very important was that they got to know their audience. And for them, that was a really central part of deciding what kind of video learning they would deliver for their employees. So by learning what their employees like, for example, they went out and they try to learn how their employees wanted to consume video, such as how long they liked it, they would like to watch it, what type of content, and whether they would be using it on mobile. And from talking with their employees, they delivered two types of video learning. One type is called QuickCasts, and another one is the 120 seconds. And from the name, 120 seconds are little learning videos that are about no longer than 2 minutes. And those are usually more focused on task-oriented learning topics. And the other type, QuickCast, is the name that they gave for the other type of learning, are more complex content, and those usually are no more than 10 minutes long. So like we see here, they're delivering learning for the type of learning that wants very short and quick videos that go straight to the point. And another thing they did was that they wanted to be creative with video learning. So they also encouraged their employees to submit their own videos. And as we see that people do like to learn from each other, they like collaborating, they like sharing. So by encouraging user-generated videos, they were able to see a lot of benefits and a lot of usage from the videos. And even today, they're seeing a lot of success with how the videos are being used. They're continuing getting more funding from the L&D organization on delivering video learning, and their business leaders are also incorporating video learning in their career paths and development when they speak with their employees. So that's one of the really good examples of a company who's been doing a really good job with how to deliver video learning for the employees, and they're seeing continued benefits from it. And then from here, I believe we have another audience poll. Xavier, could you pull it up? And I think it's on the topic of, how well your organization is doing today to meet the needs and the preferences of your learning audience.
Here we go. So you should all see the poll. Thank you for your participation. There it goes. Yeah, answers are...
So while you guys are... Sorry.
Go ahead, Todd.
I was just going to say, I want to point out that while people are thinking about and taking the poll question, we're talking quite a lot about online methods, but that's not the only way that companies are meeting the need. We've heard stories recently. MasterCard, for example, has a reverse mentoring program where they're setting some of their millennial employees up to shadow and work with directly some of their top executives in the C-suite to train them on how to use LinkedIn and Twitter and other social networks to communicate with their employees and other constituencies. Google is getting a lot of recognition for a program called G2G, which is about connecting individual employees to each other through a program where anybody can teach a class on anything. Their L&D organization sets up tools and templates and helps them to book space and make sure that they know how to organize and run a classroom, but they get out of the way and let the experts who are passionate about their topics share and spread their knowledge with their colleagues. So there's lots of ways to skin this cat, and technology is an important one, but it's not the only one.
Okay, so we have the results of the poll. Wendy, could you summarize the result for Todd?
Sure. So what's interesting that I see right away is that nobody said that they were meeting audience needs very well, or extremely well, I'm sorry. So only a fraction said that you were doing very well, and actually the majority, 56%, said somewhat, like in the middle. And a third said not so well, and another fraction said not at all.
Yeah,
Wow.
I would provide an insight on that. It says that if we take a look at how we act and and share information and data with our customers, it just showed that in regarding digital skills, it's the user itself that knows what he needs. So as he's the only one to know what he needs, it's difficult for learning and development teams to really be aware of their needs. So it's not a surprise that the audience today, you are not really meeting the needs, or you believe you don't meet the needs of your learning audience, which to me is not a surprise, because once again the learners knows what he wants more than his manager or his learning and development manager. That's the case for digital skills. It's probably different for anything about management, finance, security, process, compliance, etc. But in digital skills, the user knows where he's lacking skills.
Okay.
Todd, I'm gonna shut the poll, and you're back on board.
Great, thank you. So Wendy's going to go through, so I think we all recognize there's a challenge here. We all recognize we've got a lot of work to do. Wendy's going to talk a little bit about what we've seen in terms of what works for companies that seem to be on the right track.
Okay, thank you, Todd. So from a strategic standpoint, and a lot of our research has addressed this, that a learning culture is imperative for a strong learning organization. So for any type of new learning initiatives for processes, you need to have a strong learning culture as a foundation before you can move on to create anything new or anything innovative. And in fact, learning culture is the top 3 most critical elements of being a strong learning organization. And our research also says that having this strong culture can influence how learning content is developed, how it's used by the employees, whether it's encouraged for employees to seek it out themselves, to self-direct their own development, and a culture that values learning would support just-in-time delivery processes and different types of technologies. So in summary, we've actually identified 40 different top practices that an organization could do, and we've actually categorized them into these 6 main categories. As you can see here, it starts off with building trust, leading to encouraging reflection, and then all the way to enabling knowledge sharing and then formalizing learning as a process. And within the top 10 of the 40 practices, the 3 things that organization can do to build a really strong culture is if the organization views learning technologies and skills as something that's valuable and that could be beneficial to develop. And if employees sees L&D opportunities offered to be beneficial to them, to be of high value, that's also another practice that can help build a really strong culture. And also, when employees take initiative and take responsibility for their own personal development, that's also another sign of a very strong learning culture. So moving on to, so once you have the strategic foundation, let's take a look at one type of tactical approach. We talked here and there about video learning. We've heard some examples of companies using it. So why are we talking about so much about video learning? Well, a lot of companies are seeing the value of it and how rich it makes the overall formal learning process. And as a type of on-demand learning, there's some misconception that it's unplanned and informal. And while that could be true, it's not the only way it can be used. It is available and it is flexible for employees to use and access whenever they want, whenever they need it, which has been a great value for many organizations. And also, it's the way that people want to learn today. But it can also be formalized. So there are organizations who have embedded as part of their formal learning. And we'll actually go to an example in a couple minutes that looks at how a company has done that. And as part of a formal process, video learning can be part of an employee's competency matching during career development. It can be part of a pre-work for more formal learning. So there's a lot of flexibility, and there's many ways that video learning can be leveraged in a company for employees to for their professional development and just everyday task-related development as well. And then one important question that many companies face when they do want to implement video learning is, should they buy or should they build their own videos? And while there is no one right answer for everybody, many companies have built their own, but many have also bought off the shelf or partnered with learning content providers. And there are three main reasons why many companies would opt to just buy. And those three reasons really come down to money, the time, the speed of time, how fast it can get the learning, and also the variety of the expertise that they could get from a professional provider. With the cost, I think some of that is pretty obvious. Many companies that try to build their own, they recognize that they need to have a specialized team who have the IT skills and also have a team of people with the content knowledge, and that all takes a lot of time and also money. So there's the cost and speed benefits of buying off shelf that many companies opt to do. And then also for companies, whether they have bought or they have built themselves, one of the things, the common theme that you hear from a lot of them is that you need a variety. You need a diversity of sources. So even if they built in-house, they still are trying to get something from outside the company just as a different perspective, or just to get a different variety of expertise. And one of the most important things for video learning for a lot of L&D professionals is the content. So while it may be something that's popular for people to do, that they want video, they want something they can access, but the real value itself is in the content that's delivered. So delivery methods may change over time, but as long as the content is business relevant, that's what's really important. You can reuse or refurbish old content from past or videos that have been 6 years old, but as long as it's still relevant today, applicable, and can help employees do their jobs better, that's what is really the advantage of using video learning. And now we're going to look at another company who has done also a pretty good job of building out a video library. So Blue Cross Blue Shield is a large U.S. health insurance provider, and this example is their branch in the state of North Carolina. So a few years ago in 2010, a new healthcare law was passed, and that had a sweeping effect of how insurance companies in the U.S. How they bill their clients, their processes, and their policies. All of that changed. So they really needed the Blue Cross needed their employees to catch up very quickly so that they could get their customers up to date with the new regulation and to be able to educate their own customers how those policies would change. And they needed their employees to get up to speed very fast. But at the same time, they realized that their current learning function was not sustainable for what they needed. In their corporate university, they had 2 instructors, and it was filled with 12-week courses, and that was just not feasible for them. They need something right away for employees to get up to speed as soon as they needed it. So they wanted something more consumable. They wanted more bite-sized learning experiences, and they wanted employees to be able to access them whenever they needed to help a customer with a specific issue. So again, they partner with a video provider, and through that partnership, they built a virtual library with hundreds of videos, and they're all in bite-sized nuggets. And they actually came up with something more of a blended experience of classroom and online content. And they actually divided that up between their learning content that would be foundational, that will require more traditional type of learning. So they still kept it. They didn't scratch out their whole traditional learning. But they also added a lot of content on inferential learning. So once they've had the foundation of learning, they wanted to be able to add videos and resources that employees could access to get up to speed to what they have already learned. And the impact is not trivial. So they started this about a year ago, June of 2013. And this past year, over 1,800 hours of videos have been used by their employees. And they were able to spend less time, over 60% less time in creating content. And they were able to save over $11,000 per course. And what the company leaders say, and what they see as a continuing benefit, is that these videos help the employees make sense of very complex topics, and especially with insurance and billing and policy information, and having to be able to learn that and also communicate that with customers. The videos were really, really beneficial. And they also said that the video seems to be the medium that has worked the best for them in terms of being able to engage with their employees in how learning is delivered. And with that, Todd will wrap up and share some final thoughts on what we could do in your company.
Yeah, so I'm conscious we're short on time. The short version of this is I think we can all agree that technology is transforming work, jobs, organizations, society. Because of that, there's a growing gap in terms of organizations' ability to keep up with those changes. At the same time, learners themselves and the way that organizations deliver learning are changing in pretty dramatic ways. And that means that there's a brand new landscape for how learning needs to be put together and learning experiences need to be created for engaging the employee and to be effective in terms of delivering the digital skills and capabilities that organizations need now. A big way that organizations are attacking this now, although not the only way, is through on-demand video learning. And as that happens, what we're seeing is that a lot of L&D organizations are starting to see their jobs themselves evolve. More and more organizations are spending less time on traditional forms of instructional design, devoting more resources and more of their budget dollars to, and more attention to creating, editing, curating video. And those are some new roles for L&D teams to take on. And so L&D teams themselves are starting to retool as a result. So that's our perspective for today on how to build digital capabilities. We're open to questions, and here's our contact information if anybody's got any questions that they want to follow up on later on.
Thank you, Todd and Wendy. We have a bunch of questions. I tried to summarize, and maybe we will gonna take 3 of them. You mentioned earlier regarding that as LMS was not the only point of contact for learning. In which IT or HRIS do you believe learners would access their training then, if it's not in the LMS?
Well, It is the LMS. So I guess my point is that the LMS is not the only place. First of all, I guess the short answer to that question is a lot of it is happening because it's happening in self-directed ways on the open web, which is in any corporate IT system. If there's one IT system where things seem to be gravitating, although I'd say it's at a very small scale at the moment, it would be towards enterprise social networks. Content is important, obviously, but the context of that content is much more important. People need to know things for specific reasons, not because they need to know just in case. And so when people have questions, it's helpful to be able to connect directly to individuals who know how to solve those problems or can guide you through figuring it out. And so a lot of organizations have spent a lot of money and a lot of time to try and create online communities for their employees. And so that's one big beneficiary. But the other thing is, as a lot more of this stuff is happening on the open web, what we're seeing is new ways to try and capture at least some of what's happening out there. And that's what you're seeing in terms of some of these movements towards things like open badges or the Experience API, which is sort of the next evolution of the SCORM standard, which is what enables LMSs to track what learning happens inside the LMS environment. The X API is endeavoring to try and capture, or at least provide a tool for capturing more of what's happening out on the open web.
Okay, here's another one. How would you differentiate, how can I summarize this question, e-learning modules, standard and regular e-learning modules versus bite-sized video learning? Not and let's put on the side the video as the media. What's the difference between old-fashioned e-learning modules from your standpoint to bite-sized video learning?
I think a big difference is that a lot of traditional e-learning is very text-heavy, whereas video is obviously more visual. Which isn't to say one is better than the other, because you can do both of them very badly, very easily. Another big one is that a lot of e-learning courses, and this is changing, but a lot of e-learning courses tended to be put together in longer blocks of time. Used to be 2 or 3 hours. These days it's probably more like 20 or 30 minutes at a time. But even 20 or 30 minutes is a big ask for a lot of people. Best practice for a lot of the video that's being created is under 5 minutes, which isn't to say that you can learn everything in under 5 minutes, but I think there's a growing recognition that if there's something that requires more time, then the best approach is to break that up and spread it out rather than try and squeeze it all into a smaller container.
Okay, so the more you answer, Todd, the more questions we receive. So I have another one interesting regarding some studies that could exist about the effectiveness of those new modes of training in terms of performance improvement. I mean, do you have any studies like that at Bersin?
That's not what we do. We don't track the performance of individual methods. We've asked people in our audience, which is primarily L&D executives, what is working for them, and not surprisingly, the methods that are more collaborative, more action-oriented, more active, that is, and that are embedded closer to where the work actually happens and the questions actually arise, tend to be viewed as more effective. But there's plenty of other research out there, both from solution providers and vendors, as well as academic research that goes into some of those questions more deeply than we do. And again, I would say that there's no sort of one-size-fits-all approach. They can all be done effectively and they can all be done ineffectively.
Okay, we
It's
have
very much an art form here.
we have 2 minutes left, so we will take one last that goes beyond digital skills. It's about more complex learning, such as leadership or mentoring. How do you believe learning manager could inspire their employees to go out their ways to seek some course on their own? It's about customer
Well, first of all,
user engagement. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So the question, if I understood it, was how can learning managers inspire people to develop
No, to go out their
their own
ways.
leadership?
No, to go out. I mean, to find and to go out to find the courses that they need on their own. To self improvement and self behavior. They are looking for something maybe that their company cannot match. How do you inspire your employee to get, okay, if you need something, go on your own to try to find them? I'm trying to make this question clear, but it goes on the on the
Yeah.
platform.
Well, I think I get it. I think learning is a two-way street, but the general trend that we see in many organizations is a very clear directive that individuals are responsible for their own careers. The organization obviously has a very strong vested interest in making sure that people have the skills, have the knowledge, have the capabilities they need to perform well. But in organizations that are spread out around the world that have 4 or 5 generations of people working in them, that have people from multiple cultures, there's no way that any learning and development team can deliver everything that everybody needs all the time. So they're pushing more and more people to take responsibility for filling in some of those gaps themselves. And one way that L&D teams can do that quite effectively is by simply pointing them to the resources that are most directly tied to the corporate objectives. Here at Deloitte, for example, we get notifications from our learning team about massive open online courses, for example, that are relevant to people in specific practice areas or around leadership skills. There are directories online that you can point people to where they can go and search for their own courses. Obviously, tuition reimbursement is an extremely effective way of doing of encouraging people and giving them incentives to do some of this stuff. But ultimately, I think it comes down to what Wendy talked about before, which is the learning culture. Does the organization overall encourage, support, and recognize and reward people for learning and doing better? And specifically, do people's managers, which are probably the most influential conduit for L&D people to drive demand for learning solutions, do people's individual managers and to the leaders in business units see the value and promote the value of learning to their teams? That's a critical element because you can't do it all by yourself.
Okay. Personally, I've learned a lot during this webinar. I hope all the registrants will be also pleased about this information and feedback that you provide. For sure, at Vodeclic, with my team, we'll do our best to integrate all those information and to try to provide, the best information and the best solution to ensure that for those companies who need to go through digital transformation and that they expect to drive, performance and productivity with their team and their staff, to use technology on a day-to-day basis. For sure, we will do our best to use those information. So thanks again, Wendy, and thanks again, Tob, for this information. Uh, and I wish you a good day. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.